I will never forget the moment my mother looked me straight in the eyes and said, "We will not pay your college tuition. You do not deserve it." Those words hit me like a physical blow as I stood in our living room, Northwestern University acceptance letter trembling in my hands. Just 3 feet away, my twin sister Chloe was celebrating her identical acceptance letter, while our mother Patricia wrote out a check for her full tuition payment of $48,000. Same program, same university, same grades, same achievements. Yet somehow only one of us deserved their support. The unfairness cut so deep I could barely breathe. Looking back now, I should have seen this coming. The signs were always there, glaring at me like neon billboards that I somehow refused to acknowledge. Growing up as twins, Chloe and I had shared everything from cribs to clothes to birthday parties, but we had never shared our parents' affection equally. When we turned 16, Chloe received a brand new Honda Civic with a giant red bow tied around the antenna. I got bus fare and a city transit map. When Chloe struggled with calculus during junior year, our parents hired a private tutor who came to the house 3 times a week. When I struggled with chemistry, they told me to figure it out myself, because struggling builds character. During family vacations to places like Yellowstone and the Grand Canyon, Chloe chose all the activities while I tagged along like an afterthought, carrying everyone's backpacks and water bottles. I had convinced myself that these differences were just coincidences, or maybe results of Chloe being more vocal about her needs. But sitting at our kitchen table that evening after the college acceptance announcements, I realized the truth was far more calculated than I had ever imagined. My father, Richard, cleared his throat and adjusted his wire-rimmed glasses, a gesture I knew meant he was about to deliver uncomfortable news. His salt and pepper hair was perfectly combed as always, and his navy blue button-down shirt was wrinkle-free despite him having worn it to work all day at the accounting firm. "Aleta, we need to discuss the financial reality of your situation." He began in the same tone he probably used with clients who owed back taxes. "Your mother and I have made a careful assessment of both you girls and your potential for success." Patricia nodded enthusiastically, her auburn hair bouncing as she moved. She wore her favorite emerald green blouse, the one she always chose when she wanted to appear authoritative. "Chloe has always shown more initiative and leadership potential. She participates in student government volunteers at the animal shelter and maintains strong social connections." I stared at them in disbelief. "I have a 4.0 grade point average. I am editor of the school newspaper. I volunteer at the literacy center every Saturday. I work 20 hours a week at the bookstore to save money for college." "Those are all very nice accomplishments," my mother replied with a dismissive wave of her manicured hand. "But Chloe has that special spark that will take her far in life. We believe she will make better use of a quality education." The words stung like acid on an open wound. I glanced over at Chloe, who was examining her perfectly painted pink fingernails and saying nothing to defend me. She wore her lucky purple sweater, the one she claimed brought her good fortune, and her blonde hair was styled in loose curls that caught the overhead light. "We have been planning for this moment for years." My father continued reaching into his briefcase and pulling out a manila folder. "We opened a college savings account for Chloe when she was born. We have been making regular deposits every month for the past 18 years. My heart began racing as the implications of his words sank in. "What about my college fund?" The silence that followed felt like an eternity. Patricia and Richard exchanged a meaningful glance, the kind of wordless communication that long-married couples perfect over decades together. "We never opened an account for you." My mother finally admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "We felt that Chloe would benefit more from financial support while you seemed naturally independent and capable of finding your own way." I felt like I was drowning in confusion and betrayal. "You have been saving money for 18 years for one daughter but not the other." My father opened the manila folder and spread several bank statements across our dining room table. The papers were organized in chronological order, showing monthly deposits of $300 into something labeled Chloe College Fund. The balance had grown to over $64,000. We made sacrifices to save this money, Patricia explained, smoothing down her blouse. We drove older cars, took fewer vacations, and budgeted carefully to ensure Chloe would have every opportunity. But you took plenty of vacations, I protested, remembering our trips to Disney World, Washington, D.C., and that expensive ski resort in Colorado last winter. Those were educational experiences for Chloe, Richard replied matter-of-factly, broadening her horizons and exposing her to different cultures and experiences. I felt physically sick as I stared at the bank statements. 18 years of deliberate, calculated favoritism laid out in black and white numbers. Every birthday, every Christmas, every family celebration, where I had wondered why Chloe seemed to receive more expensive gifts, it all made sense now. They had been investing in her future while viewing me as a temporary resident in their house. The next morning I woke up with renewed determination burning in my chest like a furnace. If my parents thought I would simply accept their decision and give up on my dreams, they had seriously underestimated me. I had worked too hard and sacrificed too much to let their favoritism derail my future. I spent the entire weekend researching every possible option for financing my education. Federal student loans, state grants, merit-based scholarships, work-study programs, cooperative education opportunities. I created spreadsheets, tracking application deadlines, eligibility requirements, and award amounts. My bedroom looked like a war room with papers covering every surface, and colored sticky notes marking important dates on my calendar. On Monday morning, I drove to Northwestern University in my 15-year-old Toyota Corolla, the car I had bought with money earned from my part-time job at the bookstore. The campus was beautiful in the early spring sunshine, with students walking between Gothic Revival buildings surrounded by blooming cherry trees and perfectly manicured lawns. The financial aid office was located in a brick building near the center of campus. Mrs. Henderson, the financial aid counselor, was a woman in her early 50s, with graying brown hair and kind eyes behind purple-framed glasses. She wore a navy blue cardigan over a white blouse and listened patiently as I explained my situation. "This is unfortunately more common than you might think," she said gently, handing me a box of tissues when my voice began to crack. "Some families make financial decisions that seem unfair to outside observers." Mrs. Henderson helped me complete a detailed financial aid application and explained the different types of assistance available. I qualified for some federal loans, but the amounts were nowhere near enough to cover the full cost of tuition, housing, and expenses. I would need to find additional funding sources or face the possibility of attending a less expensive school. I refused to give up, I told her firmly. "This has been my dream since I was 12 years old. I will make it work somehow." She smiled and handed me a thick folder filled with scholarship applications. "I admire your determination. Start with these opportunities and keep applying for everything you can find. Sometimes persistence pays off in unexpected ways." I left campus that afternoon and drove straight to downtown Indianapolis to start job hunting. By the end of the week, I had secured 3 part-time positions tutoring middle school students in math and English for $15 per hour, waitressing at a family restaurant called Murphy's Kitchen during evening shifts, and working overnight cleaning crew at office buildings from midnight to 6 in the morning. My new schedule was absolutely exhausting. School from 8 in the morning until 3 in the afternoon, tutoring from 4 to 6, dinner shift at Murphy's from 7 to 11, then the cleaning job until dawn. I would catch 3 or 4 hours of sleep before starting the cycle again. But every dollar I earned brought me closer to my goal. Meanwhile, Chloe was enjoying her final semester of high school with the carefree attitude of someone whose future was completely secure. She went shopping for dorm room decorations with our mother, spent hours on the phone with friends discussing which sororities they wanted to rush, and attended prom in a $500 dress that Patricia bought without question. I watched this celebration of Chloe's success with growing resentment, but tried to stay focused on my own preparations. During my lunch breaks at school, I worked on scholarship essays in the library. I wrote about overcoming adversity, demonstrating leadership, and maintaining academic excellence despite working multiple jobs. Each application required me to dig deeper into my experiences and articulate my goals with greater clarity. 2 months into my intensive schedule, I received an unexpected phone call from a lawyer named Mr. Thompson. He represented the estate of my grandmother, Helen, who had passed away 3 years earlier. I remembered her as a kind woman who always smelled like vanilla and cinnamon, who taught me to bake chocolate chip cookies and told me stories about her childhood during the Great Depression. "I am calling regarding a specific bequest in your grandmother's will," Mr. Thompson explained in a professional but warm tone. "She left money specifically designated for your educational expenses. I need to discuss the details with you and your parents." My heart began racing with hope and confusion. Grandmother Helen had left me money for college. Why had my parents never mentioned this inheritance? That evening, I confronted them in the living room where they were watching television. My father was in his usual spot on the brown leather recliner, while my mother sat on the matching sofa with Chloe beside her. The local news was reporting on road construction projects that would affect the morning commute. Why did I receive a call from Grandmother Helen's lawyer about money she left for my education? I asked, standing in front of the television so they could not ignore me. The color drained from both of their faces. Patricia fumbled with the remote control to mute the television while Richard suddenly found the ceiling fascinating to study. "We were going to tell you about that eventually," my mother said unconvincingly. "Your grandmother did leave some money with specific instructions that it be used for your college expenses." "How much money?" I demanded. "About $25,000, my father admitted reluctantly. I felt like I had been hit by lightning. $25,000 would cover more than half of my first-year expenses. "Where is this money now?" "We invested it wisely to help it grow," Patricia explained, avoiding eye contact. "The funds are not immediately accessible, but we plan to make them available when the time is right." Something about their explanation did not ring true. Their body language was defensive and evasive, completely different from their confident demeanor when discussing Chloe's college fund. "I want to see the documentation," I insisted. Richard sighed heavily and disappeared into his home office. He returned with a folder containing my grandmother's will and several investment statements. As I read through the legal documents, I felt a cold rage building in my chest. The will was crystal clear. "I hereby bequeath the sum of $25,000 to my granddaughter Aleta Marie Thompson, said funds to be used exclusively for her post-secondary educational expenses, including tuition, housing, textbooks, and related costs." The investment statements told a different story. The money had been moved into accounts that also contained funds my parents had used for home renovations, a new deck, and a recent trip to Europe that I had not been invited to join. My grandmother had specifically left money for my education, and my parents had been treating it as their personal slush fund. Despite the obstacles my family had placed in my path, I refused to let their betrayal destroy my future. In August, I moved into the smallest, cheapest dormitory room available at Northwestern, a space barely larger than a walk-in closet that I shared with a girl named Sarah from rural Illinois. Sarah was studying social work and came from a farming family that grew corn and soybeans on 300 acres outside of Bloomington. She had warm brown eyes and auburn hair that she usually kept in a practical ponytail. Her clothes were simple and functional, and she approached college with the same no-nonsense attitude she had learned from years of helping with farm chores. "I have never lived anywhere with this many people," she confessed on our first day, gesturing toward the busy hallway, where dozens of students were moving furniture and boxes. Back home, our nearest neighbor is 2 miles away. I liked Sarah immediately. She was genuine and hardworking, completely different from the privileged students I had observed during orientation week, who complained about their dorm rooms not having enough closet space or the dining hall not serving their favorite brands of cereal. My financial situation was precarious, but manageable. I had taken the maximum amount of federal student loans, which covered about 60% of my expenses. The rest had to come from my savings and ongoing work income. I kept my 3 part-time jobs and added a 4th position working in the campus library on weekend mornings. My typical day began at 5:30 in the morning, when my alarm would wake me after 3 hours of sleep following my overnight cleaning shift. I would shower quickly in the communal bathroom, grab a granola bar and instant coffee from the stash I kept in my desk drawer, and head to my first class by 8 o'clock. Classes ran until mid-afternoon. Then I would rush across campus to my tutoring job, where I helped struggling students with mathematics and writing assignments. The tutoring center was located in the basement of the education building, a windowless space with fluorescent lighting and mismatched furniture that somehow made learning feel more challenging than it needed to be. At 6 o'clock, I would catch a bus to Murphy's Kitchen, the family restaurant where I worked dinner shifts 4 nights per week. The restaurant was owned by an elderly Irish couple named Patrick and Maureen Murphy, who treated their employees like extended family members. Patrick had thick white hair and a booming laugh that could be heard throughout the dining room, while Maureen managed the kitchen with military precision and made sure everyone ate a proper meal during their breaks. "You work harder than anyone I have ever hired," Maureen told me one evening, as I balanced 5 plates on my arms while weaving between crowded tables. "But you look like you have not slept in weeks." She was right. Dark circles had taken up permanent residence under my eyes, and I had lost 15 pounds since starting college because I often forgot to eat regular meals. But I was maintaining a 4.0 grade point average and slowly accumulating enough money to pay my bills. Meanwhile, 20 miles away at the same university, Chloe was living a completely different college experience. She had joined a sorority called Delta Gamma, moved into a spacious house with 15 other girls, and filled her schedule with social activities that our parents encouraged and funded without question. I would occasionally see her on campus, usually surrounded by a group of perfectly dressed friends carrying designer handbags and discussing their weekend plans to visit Chicago for shopping and dining. She always looked well-rested and carefree, her blonde hair styled professionally, and her clothes clearly expensive. During the fall semester, I applied for dozens of scholarships ranging from $500 to $10,000. Academic merit awards, need-based grant scholarships for first-generation college students awards, for students pursuing journalism degrees. I spent countless hours crafting essays that told my story while trying to sound inspiring rather than bitter. But something strange kept happening with my applications. Despite having strong qualifications and compelling essays, I received rejection letters from opportunities where I should have been competitive. Scholarship coordinators mentioned missing documents, late submissions, or incomplete applications that I was certain I had handled correctly. My suspicions reached a breaking point in November, when I received a rejection letter from the Indiana Press Association Scholarship, a $5,000 award specifically for journalism students. The letter mentioned that my essay submission was received 3 days after the deadline, which was impossible because I had submitted it a full week early. I called the scholarship coordinator, Dr. Martinez, a distinguished professor emeritus from Indiana University, with a reputation for supporting student journalists. He had silver hair and wore bow ties that matched his academic credentials, and his office walls were covered with framed newspaper front pages from significant historical events. "I am calling about the Indiana Press Association scholarship rejection letter," I explained. "There seems to be some confusion about my submission deadline." "Let me check our records," Dr. Martinez replied, and I could hear him typing on his computer. Yes, here it is. Your application was submitted on October 17th at 11:47 in the evening. Our deadline was October 14th at midnight. My heart sank as I realized what had happened. Dr. Martinez, I submitted that application on October 7th. I have email confirmation from your system. There was a long pause as he checked additional records. That is very strange. Our system shows 2 submissions from your email address. The first one on October 7th was incomplete, missing your essay attachment. The second submission on October 17th included all required materials but was past the deadline. I felt sick to my stomach as the implications became clear. Someone had accessed my email account and manipulated my scholarship submissions. Only one person had both the motive and the means to sabotage my applications, my twin sister Chloe. That night I confronted her in the study room of her sorority house, a beautifully decorated space with mahogany furniture and oil paintings of the organization's founders. Chloe was sitting at an antique desk working on a paper for her communications class, her laptop open and several textbooks spread around her. We need to talk about my scholarship applications, I said, closing the door behind me to ensure privacy. Chloe looked up from her computer with an expression of innocent confusion that I had seen countless times throughout our childhood. What about them? Someone has been accessing my email account and sabotaging my submissions, I replied, watching her face carefully for any signs of guilt. Her cheeks flushed pink and she began fidgeting with her sorority ring, a nervous habit I recognized from years of living together. Why would you think I know anything about that? Because you are the only person who knows my email password. We created accounts together when we were 14, and I never changed mine from the password we shared. The facade crumbled instantly. Tears began streaming down her face as she buried her head in her hands. I am so sorry, Aleta. I never meant for things to go this far. How far exactly have things gone? I demanded, sitting down across from her. I delayed 3 of your applications and deleted 2 others completely, she confessed between sobs. I changed your essays on 4 applications to make them less competitive. I felt like I was having an out-of-body experience. My own twin sister, the person who should have been my closest ally, had been actively working to sabotage my future. Why would you do this to me? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Because I was terrified that you would succeed without help and make me look bad, she admitted, wiping her eyes with a tissue. Mom and Dad have always expected me to be the successful one, the one who makes them proud. If you earned scholarships and graduated with honors while working multiple jobs, it would prove that their investment in me was unnecessary. So you decided to ensure I would fail. I thought maybe if you struggled enough, you would transfer to a cheaper school and we would not have to compete anymore, she said, her voice filled with shame. Mom and Dad have been asking me constantly about your grades and whether you seem happy at Northwestern. They want to know if you are succeeding or if you regret not accepting their advice to attend community college instead. They told me I should go to community college, I asked, surprised by this revelation. They said you were being unrealistic and stubborn by insisting on Northwestern, Chloe explained. They thought eventually you would realize you had made a mistake and come home defeated. I sat in stunned silence as I processed this information. My parents had not only refused to support my education, they had been actively hoping I would fail and prove them right. And they had enlisted Chloe as their spy to monitor my progress and report back on my struggles. The cruelty of their plan was breathtaking. They had created a competition between their own daughters where only one was allowed to succeed. Then they had rigged the game to ensure their chosen winner would triumph. By the spring semester of my freshman year, the combination of exhaustion, stress, and malnutrition was taking a serious toll on my physical and mental health. I had been operating on less than 4 hours of sleep per night for 8 months, living primarily on instant ramen noodles and peanut butter sandwiches because they were cheap and filling. My academic performance remained strong because I was determined not to give my parents any ammunition to use against me, but maintaining perfect grades while working 4 part-time jobs was becoming increasingly difficult. I had developed a persistent cough from the cleaning chemicals I used during my overnight shifts, and I frequently felt dizzy during long periods of standing at the restaurant. The final straw came during finals week in May. I was sitting in my American history exam trying to concentrate on an essay question about the New Deal programs, when suddenly the words on the paper began swimming before my eyes. The fluorescent lights seemed blindingly bright, and I felt waves of nausea washing over me. I tried to continue writing, but my hand was shaking so badly that my normally neat handwriting looked like illegible scribbles. The last thing I remembered was attempting to stand up to ask the professor for a glass of water, then everything went black. I woke up in the campus health center with a concerned-looking nurse practitioner named Linda checking my blood pressure. She was a woman in her 40s with short gray hair and competent hands that moved efficiently as she attached monitoring equipment. "You gave us quite a scare," Linda said gently. "When was the last time you had a full meal?" I tried to remember but realized it had been more than 24 hours since I had eaten anything substantial. "I have been busy with finals and work," I mumbled, feeling embarrassed and weak. "Your blood sugar was dangerously low when you arrived," she explained, handing me a cup of orange juice and a packet of crackers. "How many hours per week are you working?" "About 60 hours across 4 different jobs," I admitted. Linda frowned and made notes in my medical chart. "That schedule is not sustainable for any college student, especially someone who is obviously not eating properly or getting adequate sleep." She insisted on keeping me for observation overnight, which meant I would miss my cleaning shift and lose a night's wages that I desperately needed. As I lay on the narrow cot in the health center, I felt like a complete failure. My parents arrived the next morning, but their visit made me feel worse rather than better. Patricia wore a navy blue business suit and carried her leather briefcase as if she had stopped by between meetings. Richard was checking his phone constantly and seemed impatient to leave. "This is exactly what we were worried about," my mother said, standing at the foot of my bed with her arms crossed. "You have pushed yourself too hard and created a dangerous situation." "We told you that Northwestern was too challenging and expensive," my father added, not bothering to put his phone away. "Community college would have been more appropriate for your circumstances." "Are you seriously blaming me for collapsing from exhaustion caused by working multiple jobs to pay for school?" I asked incredulously. "We are pointing out that this situation could have been avoided if you had made more realistic choices," Patricia replied coolly. "Chloe is thriving at Northwestern because she has proper support and can focus on her studies." I wanted to scream at them that Chloe was thriving because they were paying her expenses and actively sabotaging my efforts, but I was too weak and discouraged to fight. After they left, Mrs. Henderson from the financial aid office came to visit me. She looked genuinely worried as she sat in the plastic chair next to my bed. "Linda asked me to come speak with you about your financial situation," she said kindly. "She is concerned that your work schedule is affecting your health." "I do not have any choice," I replied, trying not to cry. "I have to work this much to pay my bills." Mrs. Henderson pulled out a folder and opened it on the rolling table beside my bed. "I have been reviewing your file, and I discovered something troubling about your financial aid application." She showed me a document that made my blood run cold. It was my FAFSA form, the federal application that determines financial aid eligibility. In the section asking about parental support, someone had indicated that my parents were contributing significant money toward my education. "This is wrong," I said immediately. "My parents are not contributing anything to my expenses." "I understand that," Mrs. Henderson replied gently. "But your parents are claiming you as a dependent on their tax returns, which means legally they are supposed to be providing substantial financial support. She explained that parents cannot have it both ways. If they claim a college student as a dependent for tax benefits, they are obligated to provide financial support. If they are not providing support, the student should be classified as independent for financial aid purposes. The problem is that your dependency status affects your aid eligibility, she continued. As a dependent student with parents who appear to have significant income, you qualify for less need-based assistance. I felt like I was trapped in a legal and financial maze designed to prevent me from succeeding. My parents were claiming me as a dependent to reduce their tax obligations, while providing no actual support, which made me ineligible for the aid I desperately needed. "What can I do about this?" I asked. "You need to have a conversation with your parents about either providing the support they are legally obligated to give or releasing you to file as an independent student," Mrs. Henderson explained. That afternoon, a social worker from the campus counseling center came to speak with me. Ms. Rodriguez was a bilingual woman in her 30s who specialized in helping students navigate family financial conflicts. She had kind eyes and spoke with the authority of someone who had seen similar situations many times. "What your parents are doing is actually a form of financial abuse," she explained after I told her the complete story. "They are using the dependency system to prevent you from accessing resources while benefiting from tax advantages." Ms. Rodriguez helped me understand that my parents' behavior was not just mean or unfair, it was potentially illegal. They were required by law to provide educational support if they claimed me as a dependent, or they needed to release me to claim independence. Many students face this exact situation, she assured me. Parents who want the tax benefits of claiming adult children but refuse to provide actual support. She gave me documentation explaining my rights and options, including the possibility of filing for independent status if my parents continued to refuse support while claiming me as a dependent. For the first time in months, I felt like someone understood the impossible position my family had put me in. I was not being dramatic or unreasonable. I was being systematically prevented from succeeding by people who should have been supporting my dreams. After my collapse and hospitalization, I realized that simply working harder was not going to solve my problems. I needed to understand exactly how my parents had been manipulating the financial system and what legal options I might have to protect myself. My accounting classmate Tyler became an invaluable ally in this investigation. Tyler was a junior from Michigan who was studying business with a specialization in tax law. He had red hair, freckles, and an analytical mind that could spot financial irregularities with impressive accuracy. "Your situation sounds like dependency fraud," he told me after I explained my circumstances during a study session in the library. "Let me help you gather some evidence." Tyler taught me how to request copies of my parents' tax returns through legal channels and showed me what to look for in terms of educational tax credits and dependency claims. We spent hours in the business library researching tax code and federal regulations regarding parental support obligations. What we discovered was shocking even by my family's standards of unfairness. My parents had been claiming both Chloe and me as dependents for the past 3 years, even though I had been working and essentially supporting myself since my sophomore year of high school. "Look at this," Tyler said, pointing to a section of their tax return. "They claimed the American Opportunity Tax Credit for both of you last year." The American Opportunity Tax Credit is a federal benefit that allows parents to claim up to $2,500 per year for each child's educational expenses. My parents had claimed the maximum amount for both daughters, despite only paying expenses for one. "Is that legal?" I asked, already suspecting the answer. "Absolutely not," Tyler replied firmly. "You can only claim educational tax credits for expenses you actually pay. If they are not paying your educational costs, they cannot legally claim those credits." We dug deeper and found additional evidence of fraud. My parents had also claimed education-related deductions for expenses they had never incurred on my behalf, including textbook costs and student activity fees. But the most damning evidence came when Tyler helped me track down information about my grandmother's inheritance money. Using public records and estate documents, we discovered that the $25,000 left specifically for my education had been moved into a general family investment account that my parents controlled. "This is embezzlement," Tyler said grimly as we reviewed the bank statements. "Your grandmother's will clearly specified that money was for your educational expenses only." I felt sick as I realized the full scope of my parents' financial crimes. They had been defrauding the federal government by claiming tax benefits they were not entitled to, while simultaneously stealing money that legally belonged to me. Tyler suggested that I speak with a legal aid attorney who specialized in family financial disputes. Through the university's law clinic, I was connected with Mr. Foster, a lawyer in his 50s, who had spent 20 years helping students navigate complex family situations. Mr. Foster worked out of a small office near campus that was filled with law books and case files. He had gray hair and wore rumpled suits that suggested he cared more about justice than appearance. When I explained my situation, his expression grew increasingly serious. "Your parents have violated multiple federal laws," he confirmed after reviewing the documentation Tyler and I had gathered. "Tax fraud, dependency fraud, and misappropriation of inheritance funds." He explained that the evidence we had collected was sufficient to file complaints with both the Internal Revenue Service and the State Attorney General's office. The penalties for tax fraud could include substantial fines and potential jail time. However, Mr. Foster warned, pursuing legal action against your parents will likely destroy your family relationships permanently. I sat in his office weighing my options. I could report my parents' crimes and potentially recover the money I needed for college, but doing so would mean accepting that I would probably never have a normal relationship with my family again. "What kind of penalties are we talking about?" I asked. "For the tax fraud alone, they could owe back taxes plus penalties totaling $15,000 to $20,000, Mr. Foster explained. The misappropriation of your inheritance money would require them to immediately transfer those funds to an account in your name. I thought about Chloe, who had no idea about our parents' illegal activities, and would be devastated to learn the truth. I considered whether there was any way to resolve this situation without destroying everyone's lives. "Is there any way to handle this privately before involving government agencies?" I asked. Mr. Foster nodded. "We could start with a demand letter explaining your legal position and giving them an opportunity to correct the situation voluntarily." He drafted a formal letter outlining all of the violations we had documented and demanding that my parents either begin providing proper financial support or release me to file as an independent student. The letter also required them to transfer my inheritance money immediately and cease claiming educational tax benefits they were not entitled to receive. "If they refuse to cooperate or fail to respond within 30 days, we will file formal complaints," Mr. Foster explained as he handed me the letter to review. Reading the legal document felt surreal. After 18 years of accepting my parents' treatment as normal family dynamics, I was finally taking action to protect myself from their financial abuse. That evening, I called Jennifer, my teaching assistant from Introduction to Journalism, who had become a mentor and friend. Jennifer was a graduate student working toward her doctorate in communications, and she had supported my academic goals since the beginning of freshman year. "I think I am about to blow up my entire family," I told her as we sat in a quiet coffee shop near campus. Jennifer listened carefully as I explained the evidence Tyler and I had uncovered and the legal options Mr. Foster had outlined. She sipped her herbal tea thoughtfully before responding. "Aleta, you did not create this situation," she said firmly. "Your parents made choices that put you in an impossible position. Taking action to protect yourself is not the same thing as attacking them." "But what if I am wrong about some of this?" I asked. What if there are explanations for their behavior that I do not understand? Then they will have an opportunity to provide those explanations when they receive the letter, Jennifer replied. But from everything you have told me, this pattern of favoritism and financial manipulation has been going on your entire life. She was right. This was not a misunderstanding or a series of unfortunate coincidences. My parents had made deliberate, calculated decisions to favor one daughter while sabotaging the other, and they had broken laws in the process. I spent that night staring at the ceiling in my dorm room, knowing that I was about to cross a line that would change my family forever. But I also knew that I could not continue allowing them to control my future through financial manipulation and fraud. The next morning, I gave Mr. Foster permission to send the demand letter to my parents. 3 days after Mr. Foster sent the demand letter, my parents called and requested a family meeting. Their voices on the phone sounded strained and nervous, completely different from their usual tone of confident authority. "We need to discuss this legal situation you have created," my father said tersely. "Can you come home this weekend?" I agreed to meet with them, but I insisted that the conversation take place in a neutral location with a professional mediator present. Mr. Foster recommended Dr. Clark, a family therapist who specialized in financial conflicts and had experience dealing with legal disputes between family members. Dr. Clark's office was located in a medical building near downtown Indianapolis. The waiting room was decorated with calming colors and soft music, but I felt anything but calm as I sat between my parents and Chloe on Saturday afternoon. Dr. Clark was a woman in her early 60s with silver hair and a gentle but firm demeanor. She had spent 30 years helping families navigate difficult conversations, and she began our session by establishing ground rules for respectful communication. "Everyone will have an opportunity to speak without interruption," she explained. "The goal is to understand each person's perspective and work toward a resolution that serves everyone's best interests." My parents had brought their own lawyer, a stern-looking man named Mr. Peterson, who wore an expensive suit and carried a leather briefcase. He immediately began challenging the allegations in Mr. Foster's letter. "My clients deny any wrongdoing regarding tax filings or dependency claims," Mr. Peterson stated. "They have been following standard practices for supporting college-age children." Standard practices would involve actually providing financial support, Mr. Foster replied calmly. "My client has documentation showing that she has received no money from her parents while they claim educational tax benefits." The conversation quickly became heated as my parents defended their actions. Patricia insisted they had been teaching me independence and responsibility by refusing to pay my expenses. Richard argued that their tax filings were completely legal and appropriate. "You have always been the more self-sufficient daughter," my mother said, directing her comments toward me. "We felt that Chloe needed more support and guidance to reach her potential." "So you decided to commit tax fraud to fund her education while stealing money from my inheritance," I replied, my voice rising despite my efforts to stay calm. "We did not steal anything," my father snapped. "That inheritance money is being carefully managed for your benefit. By using it to renovate your house and take European vacations," I shot back. The accusations and denials continued for nearly an hour before Dr. Clark intervened to change the direction of our conversation. "I would like to understand the history behind these family dynamics," she said. "When did this pattern of different treatment between the sisters begin?" Patricia and Richard exchanged a long look that seemed to contain years of unspoken communication. My mother's hands were shaking as she reached for her water glass. "There are some family circumstances that complicate this situation," Patricia said slowly. "What kind of circumstances?" Dr. Clark asked gently. Another silence stretched between my parents before my father cleared his throat and spoke in a voice barely above a whisper. "Chloe is not our biological daughter." The words hit the room like a bomb explosion. Chloe gasped and grabbed my arm, her face turning pale as she stared at our parents in shock. "What do you mean?" I demanded, though part of me was already beginning to understand. "Chloe is actually your cousin," my mother explained, tears streaming down her face. "She is the daughter of my sister Margaret and her husband David." My Aunt Margaret and Uncle David had died in a car accident when Chloe and I were 5 years old. I had vague memories of a funeral, and my parents being very sad for several months afterward. Margaret and David were killed by a drunk driver on Christmas Eve. My father continued. Chloe had been staying with us that weekend while they attended a holiday party. "You adopted me but never told me," Chloe whispered, her voice filled with pain and confusion. "We thought it would be easier if you grew up believing you were our biological child," Patricia explained. "We did not want you to feel different or displaced." Dr. Clark leaned forward in her chair. "How does this relate to the different treatment between the girls?" My parents looked uncomfortable as they struggled to answer her question. "We felt guilty about Chloe losing her parents so young," my mother admitted. "We wanted to make sure she never felt like she was getting less than what she would have received from Margaret and David." "So you gave her more than you gave your biological daughter?" Dr. Clark asked. "We thought Aleta had natural advantages from being our biological child," my father said defensively. "She did not need as much additional support because she already had everything that came with being born into our family." I sat in stunned silence as I processed this twisted logic. My parents had convinced themselves that being their biological daughter was such a privilege that I did not deserve equal treatment with my adopted sister. "You punished me for being your real daughter while overcompensating for Chloe not being your real daughter," I said slowly. "We were trying to balance things fairly," Patricia insisted. "By stealing my inheritance money and committing tax fraud," I replied. Chloe suddenly stood up from her chair and began pacing around the room. "This explains everything," she said, her voice filled with anguish. "The constant pressure to be perfect, the guilt about receiving things Aleta did not get, the feeling that I had to prove I was worthy of your love." "You are worthy of our love," my mother said quickly. "You have always been our daughter." "But not in the same way Aleta is your daughter," Chloe replied. "You have been treating us like we are in competition because you felt guilty about my adoption." Dr. Clark nodded thoughtfully. "It sounds like the parents created a family dynamic where both girls suffered. Aleta was neglected and treated unfairly, while Chloe was placed under tremendous pressure to justify special treatment. I sabotaged Aleta's scholarship applications because I was terrified of losing your approval." Chloe confessed, looking directly at our parents. "You made it clear that my value in this family depended on being more successful than she was." The session continued for another 2 hours as we worked through years of buried resentments and misunderstandings. By the end of the afternoon, several important truths had emerged. My parents admitted that their guilt and grief over Margaret and David's deaths had caused them to make poor decisions about treating their children equally. They acknowledged that their favoritism toward Chloe had been unfair to both daughters and had created unhealthy competition between us. They also agreed to immediately transfer my inheritance money to an account in my name and to file amended tax returns that would correct their fraudulent claims. In exchange, I agreed not to pursue criminal charges for the tax fraud. Most importantly, both of my parents finally recognized that their treatment of me had been emotionally and financially abusive, regardless of their intentions. "We thought we were protecting both of you," my father said as our session concluded. "But we realize now that we created a situation where neither of you could be happy or secure." For the first time in my life, my parents had acknowledged that their behavior toward me had been wrong and harmful. It was not the apology I had dreamed of receiving, but it was a beginning. 2 years later, I stood at the podium in Northwestern University's auditorium, wearing a black cap and gown, looking out at an audience of proud families gathered for commencement ceremonies. The late spring sunshine streamed through tall windows, illuminating the faces of graduating seniors who had overcome countless challenges to reach this moment. As the valedictorian of the journalism program, I had been chosen to deliver the student speech at graduation. My hands trembled slightly as I gripped the podium, but my voice was strong and clear as I began to speak. When I started college 3 years ago, I believed that success meant proving I was worthy of support and recognition from the people who mattered most to me. I thought if I worked hard enough and achieved enough, I could earn the love and respect that seemed to come naturally to others. In the audience, I could see my parents sitting in the third row with tears in their eyes. Next to them sat Chloe, who had transferred to Indiana University to study social work after our family revelations. She was graduating next month with honors and planned to work with children in the foster care system. I learned that real success is not about earning approval from people who have decided you are not worthy. I continued. True achievement comes from refusing to accept unfair treatment and fighting for justice even when that fight is difficult and painful. My story had taken several unexpected turns since that confrontational family therapy session 2 years earlier. The most significant change came 6 months later when my exposé article about dependency fraud was published in the campus newspaper and subsequently picked up by the Chicago Tribune and Indianapolis Star. I had written the piece using anonymous sources to protect my family's privacy, but the article sparked widespread discussion about parents who claim tax benefits while refusing to support their college-aged children. The piece won the National College Journalism Award and led to changes in federal financial aid policies that made it easier for students to claim independent status in cases of financial abuse. My parents had kept their promises from the family therapy session. My inheritance money was transferred to my control and used to pay for my final 2 years of college. They filed amended tax returns and paid substantial penalties for their previous fraudulent claims. More importantly, they began attending weekly therapy sessions to address the grief and guilt that had driven their unfair treatment of both daughters. The process was slow and sometimes painful, but our family relationships gradually began to heal. The most valuable lesson I learned in college was not found in any textbook or lecture hall, I told the graduating class. I learned that sometimes the people who are supposed to love us the most can cause the deepest wounds, but those wounds can become sources of strength if we refuse to let them define our worth. My father, Richard, had written me a long letter the previous month, apologizing for years of favoritism and acknowledging the damage his choices had caused. He had started volunteering with a nonprofit organization that helps first-generation college students navigate financial aid applications, using his accounting skills to prevent other families from making his mistakes. My mother, Patricia, had joined a support group for parents of adopted children and was working to understand how her unprocessed grief had affected her parenting decisions. She had also begun contributing monthly to a scholarship fund for students facing family financial obstacles. To my fellow graduates who overcame family rejection, financial hardship, or personal trauma to be here today, I want you to know that your struggles have not been in vain. I said, feeling my voice grow stronger with each word. You have proven that determination and self-respect are more powerful than privilege or favoritism. Mrs. Henderson from the financial aid office had become one of my closest mentors and had offered me a job as a student advocate after graduation. I would be working with students facing family financial conflicts, helping them navigate the complex systems that had nearly derailed my own education. Tyler, my accounting classmate who had helped investigate my parents' fraud, had become my business partner in a consulting service that helps students understand their financial aid rights. We were developing resources to educate families about dependency laws and prevent the kind of abuse I had experienced. The greatest gift we can give ourselves is the refusal to accept less than we deserve. I concluded my speech. Not because we are entitled to special treatment, but because everyone deserves to be treated with fairness and respect. Sarah, my first roommate who had become my closest friend, was sitting in the front row cheering loudly. She had graduated the previous year with her social work degree and was working at a rural family services agency where she helped farming families access educational resources for their children. As I looked out at the audience of families celebrating their graduates, I felt a deep sense of peace and accomplishment. My relationship with my parents would never be perfect, but it was built on honesty rather than favoritism. Chloe and I had developed a genuine friendship based on mutual support rather than manufactured competition. Most importantly, I had learned that my worth was not determined by other people's opinions or support. I had fought for myself when no one else would, and that victory belonged entirely to me. The future belongs to those who believe in themselves enough to fight for their dreams, I said as I concluded my speech. Congratulations to the class of 2025. You have earned everything that comes next. The audience erupted in applause as I walked away from the podium and back to my seat among my graduating classmates. In the front row, Mrs. Henderson was wiping tears from her eyes and giving me a thumbs-up sign. After the ceremony, my parents approached me with genuine pride shining in their faces. For the first time in my life, their approval felt like a bonus rather than a necessity. "We are so proud of everything you have accomplished," my father said, his voice thick with emotion. "You saved our entire family by refusing to accept unfair treatment," my mother added. "We know now that we almost destroyed something precious because of our own fears and unhealed grief." Chloe hugged me tightly and whispered, "Thank you for fighting back. If you had not stood up to them, I would have spent my whole life feeling guilty about privileges I did not earn and did not need." As I walked across campus after graduation, wearing my cap and gown and carrying my diploma, I reflected on the journey that had brought me to this moment. 3 years earlier, I had been a broken teenager who believed she was not worthy of her parents' support or investment. Now I was a confident young woman who understood that worthiness is not something we earn from others. It is something we claim for ourselves by refusing to accept less than we deserve, and fighting for justice even when the battle is difficult. My phone buzzed with a text message from Mr. Foster, the legal aid attorney, who had helped me navigate the confrontation with my parents. He was congratulating me on my graduation and my new job, and he mentioned that 3 other students had contacted his office about similar family financial abuse situations after reading my article. The cycle of helping others who faced the same struggles I had overcome was just beginning. Every student who learned to recognize financial abuse and fight for their rights was a victory for justice and fairness. As I packed my belongings and prepared to start the next chapter of my life, I knew that the little girl who had always wondered why her sister received more love and support had finally found her answer. The inequality had never been about my worth or value. It had been about my parents' inability to process their own grief and guilt in healthy ways. But more importantly, I had learned that I did not need their recognition or support to succeed. I had always been enough exactly as I was, and no one could take that truth away from me. The future stretched ahead full of possibilities and promise. I was ready to embrace every opportunity with the confidence that comes from knowing you fought for yourself when it mattered most, and emerged victorious. Have you ever faced unfair treatment within your own family that made you question your self-worth? How did you find the strength to stand up for yourself when the people closest to you seemed determined to hold you back? I would love to hear your stories of overcoming family obstacles and fighting for your dreams in the comments below. Please like this video if my story resonated with you. Subscribe for more real-life stories about triumph over adversity, and share this with anyone who might be struggling with similar family dynamics. Thank you for listening to my journey, and I hope it encourages you to never give up on yourself, no matter who tells you that you are not worth the investment. Remember, your dreams are valid, your goals are achievable, and you deserve every opportunity to succeed.